Welcome back to another one of my chess videos. I hope you've enjoyed what I've put up so far. This is a game I played on Yahoo against Soccer Striker 14. I felt that this was a fairly equal game. It was pretty solid play on both sides. I'm going to try and go through the analysis as quick as I possibly can to get to the end game. The end game was what was most interesting. It was just queens versus pawns, and I'm not talking 4, 5, 6 queens. It was just my queen and my pawns versus his queen and his pawns, and it was actually pretty interesting. So I'm just going to go through these moves here. Just some standard stuff in the opening. I went to b5 to try and take on c6 and give him some doubled pawns. He took on f4, so I swapped. He took the b pawn. Took f4. Now my light squared bishop is gone, so he's going to make his strong by moving the c pawn out of the way and getting this nice diagonal. Went to c3. He pushed his pawn. I pushed my pawn. Knight out. Bishop out. Queen to d7. Queen to e2. Then he played knight to h5, and this was the first move I thought that he kind of made a mistake on. It's not a bad move. But I have this discovered check here, and if I wanted to, I could have snagged a pawn, given him a check, and he has to move away or put a piece in front of it, and then I could just bring the bishop right back. And if he wanted to do something like move the queen there, I could swap, check again, and then move my bishop back, winning a pawn. But I did not do that. I instead castled long. And I castled long because that's what the board was telling me to do. His bishop is attacking on the king side, his queen is attacking on the king side, and his knight is on the king side. There's nothing too much going on the queen side, and his dark squared bishop can't get in the game on this side because the pawns are there. So I castled there simply because the board said, hey, it's safer over here. So he went to e7 to prevent the discovered check. I went to g5, attacking his undefended knight. He went to f6. I put the pawn to prevent his knight from going to g4. He kicked my knight. I went to e4. He went to d5, and I took on d5. I like my position here. I'm castled. I'm safe. Things are going good. I'm going to start, let's start playing chess now. It's the 15th move. We're going to start taking some pieces. Let's move things around and see what happens. He takes back with the bishop. I kick the bishop with my c4 pawn because he's attacking my undefended a2 pawn. He goes to c6. I go to g4, gaining kingside space. He goes to d5, and I say thanks for the pawn on c5. He takes with the bishop. I take back, giving him that discovered check. He goes to d8. I put my rook on e1, winning the e-file. He goes to e8. I move my queen out of the way. He goes bishop to a4. I move my rook out of the way. He swaps on e-file. Then he attacks my bishop on c5, and after I analyzed the game, I saw that this move pretty much would have helped me win the game. e7 check is a very strong move. It protects my c5 bishop. It attacks this undefended f7 pawn. I can start munching up these pawns to start pushing my own, and the king can only go to c8, which allows me to play b3, so after I've protected my piece, moved the king, and I can munch his pawns, I also win his bishop by playing b3, because now it's trapped and it can't go anywhere. Unfortunately, I didn't see that move. I played b3 a move too soon. He took on c5, I took on a4. He moved in his queen on a3, giving me a check, and now he's attacking the a4 pawn. And after I move my rook to b2 to block the queen, he's also attacking the d3 pawn. So I did not play queen to e7, and I really should have. So he moved his rook to b8, putting pressure on b2. I can't move the rook because it's pinned. I centralize my queen on e5, attacking the g7 pawn and protecting b2. He swaps on b2, and then he decides to take the pawn, queen to d3, and this is finally the end game that I was talking to you about. Just my queen against his queen, and pawns versus pawns. My 6 pawns versus his 6 pawns. this is really interesting. I've never played just a pawn and queen endgame. And it kind of looks drawish, almost. Don't quote me on that or say that all queen pawn endgames are drawish. But since I've never played one before, I thought about it for a minute, and the fact that the queen is so powerful, I mean, you can move it and attack multiple pieces at once. You can give a check and steal a pawn. You can start trying to pin things, and there's just way too much that you can do with it. So I decided to develop a plan. My plan was to see if I can try to take some of these pawns over here so that I can advance my own on F, G, and H files, and see if I can get something going. So I checked him on B8, he went to D7, checked him on B5, he went to C8, checked him on E8, and finally I accomplished my goal. I am over here, and he went to B7. Now if I wanted to, I could have given him perpetual checks and forced a draw. I could have gone queen to B5. He can only go to C8 or A8. Then I go to E8. He can only go to B7, and I just go back and forth. And you know, he can only go to these 3 squares. Now it's not going to be a forced 3-move draw because he can go between 3 squares. But I mean, I could do this so many times that, you know, I pretty much force him to accept the draw. So he moved to B7 to get out of the way, and I took on F7. He took on C4, giving me a check. I moved out of the way to B2, and just letting you know, me coming over here to munch these pawns, I was not worried about him checkmating me or anything, because the queen alone cannot checkmate. It needs to have a pawn far enough advanced, close to the king, to help it checkmate me. The only possibility is if I was silly enough to go to A1 and he comes to C2, that would be checkmate, because the only square that I'd be able to go to is A2, but I can't because my pawn's there. So that would be checkmate. That's the only thing I have to watch out for. So he gives me a check on the B file. I hide behind A1. He goes to D4, and when he pushed this D4 pawn, I saw that I had a chance to win the game, because I was assuming that his plan was to go to D4, and after I took on G7, if he went to D3, if I tried to do something like attack the pawn by moving to D7, he can just go to D2, which is protected by the queen, and then he has a pawn very, very, very close to queening. So I assume that's what his plan was, and my plan was just a little quicker, because if he goes to D3, I saw that I would win the game. And he did play to D3, so I said yippee, and went queen to B2, and then he went to... Now he can't just go here yet, because I can take the queen with a check. He has to move, and then I take the pawn as well. So that's not good. So he can't move the queen. Well, he can't move the queen off this rank or file, because the king would be in check anyways. So he moves it back, and I say, let's trade. He takes with the A pawn, and I start chasing after this D3 pawn. And I get there, which I knew I would, and he tries to push his pawns, and I say, nope, I'm going to push mine and get there quicker. He takes on the G file, I take back, he tries to go over there with his king, and I prove that his king is going to be useless because I go to H4, and I'll explain this later. And he goes over there, and I start chasing after his pawns. I push A5, take an exchange on A5. The A pawn can't go anywhere, so I chase after the C pawn. See, his pawn can't go anywhere, so I chase that down. Now he cannot take on H4, because if he does, my pawn's going to be way too quick, and I'm going to be able to get a queen. So that's why this king against 2 connected pawns is useless. Now, if I didn't have this pawn over here, it would have been a little bit trickier, but I mean, two pawns and a king versus a pawn versus a lone king is a winning endgame anyways. So he just moves back and forth, and I go do munch the pawn, move out of the way, and I start moving this pawn. Now I have threats on two sides of the board. The king can't possibly take care of both. And see, he took on h4, and I knew I was going to post this on YouTube, so I moved this pawn instead of the a pawn. They both queen at the same time, because he tries to chase it, and it's too slow. I get a queen, and my opponent resigned here.